What's going on, guys? Billy here, and along with the new Avata, DJI also released a new set of goggles that we've been waiting a long time for. So these right here are the DJI Goggles 2, which happen to be the smallest headset that they have ever created. Over the years, DJI has come out with 5 different versions of goggles that have culminated to what we have here today in the second generation goggles. I know that it might be a little bit confusing that I'm calling these the second generation goggles when we obviously have 4 different sets of goggles here on the table, but the progression of these headsets really has been a little bit weird over the past couple of years. So the first set of goggles that DJI released were massive. They were unveiled alongside the original Mavic Pro back in 2016 and connected wirelessly to the drone through that newly announced OcuSync transmission system. So while the user experience was effortless, the sheer size of them turned a lot of people off. You know, it's crazy how fast time flies. I remember 2016 when the Mavic Pro came out was the year that I graduated from high school. I purchased the Mavic Pro as like the second drone that I owned, and the DJI goggles finally were available for order in spring of 2017. I remember being in English class, ordering them as the teacher was talking. So yeah, just kind of a funny story. But also just a quick tidbit, they ended up releasing an FPV version of these goggles as well that I never ended up purchasing. Now fast forward from there, DJI started to take the whole FPV thing a little bit more seriously by designing a remote controller, air units, and a new set of goggles. So these here are the DJI FPV goggles version 1 that really changed the game in terms of image transmission. This was one of the first digital-based FPV transmission systems that provided better connectivity for an overall more enjoyable flight over older systems running on an analog system. Now the next goggles release from DJI, called the FPV Goggles version 2, wasn't much of an upgrade, as we basically received a similar pair with the same design and specs, but the internals had been upgraded to accommodate the new transmission system in their newly released DJI FPV Drone at the time, which was back in March of 2021. Okay, so now that we've taken our little trip down memory lane, we have finally arrived here at the newly released DJI Goggles 2. Now here's something interesting, and I wanted to go over all of these previous releases with you to kind of help ingrain the naming scheme of these different goggles in your mind. So these ones here, the black goggles with the 4 antennas on the front, are DJI's FPV goggles, right? We've got the version 1 and the version 2, but we look all the way back to 2016, we have the original DJI goggles. So these were designed not for FPV drones, they were designed for GPS drones. Well, what are these new goggles named? They are the DJI Goggles 2. So these new goggles are actually an upgrade or a predecessor to the very first DJI goggles that came out 6 years ago. And I find that so interesting that they have finally released an upgrade here. Now, the reason I find this even more interesting is because these could potentially be opened up to future drones or drones we already have in DJI's lineup that are not even on the FPV side of things. So because these now have head tracking in them, and because you can now actually select between devices within the UI, which we'll get into here shortly, I can see them opening these up to drones that they have available right now, like the Mini 3 Pro or the Mavic 3, because again, they don't have the name FPV in them. So I just found that really interesting that after 6 or 7 years, we finally got a new set of goggles. These are not just like FPV goggles, these are full-on goggles. So just a cool thing to mention. And don't worry, I'll be keeping an eye for firmware updates coming out over the next couple of months to see if these do become compatible with other drones like Mavic 3, Air 2S, or any future GPS drones. Okay, so enough beating around the bush. Let's finally jump into what's new with these goggles. So the design is by far the biggest change. Compared to the previous FPV Goggles version 2 and those first goggles, they are about half the size and almost half the weight. This makes a big difference during those longer flying sessions where a larger set of goggles might become fatiguing. Also, it really makes a difference when cramming them into a bag. The smaller goggles can fit in many more spaces. Now, staying on this topic of size and design, the port selection between the FPV Goggles version 2 and Goggles 2 has remained the same, with a USB-C port for connecting your phone to like the DJI Fly app, a micro SD card slot, a headphone jack, and a port to supply power. They've just sort of been rearranged with the redesign. There's also a new antenna set up on the front side of the goggles, so instead of a quad antenna setup like on the FPV Goggles version 2, we only have 2 on the Goggles 2. These antennas fold up though for easy travel and are still removable in case you need to swap them out for new ones. Now, the way that we interact and control this new set of goggles has also changed from physical buttons to a touchpad on the side. This makes it really easy to flip through menus and access different settings. There are quick functions functions built into the UI as well, with the ability to swipe down, to the right, or upwards to access different menus. There's another similarity for you right there between the new set of goggles and the original DJI goggles, as they also had a touchpad on the side, so it's really cool to see them combining technology from the FPV goggles and the older set of goggles to make what we have now in the Goggles 2. Now, in terms of padding, the insert on these new goggles is removable, and I actually just picked up the replacement foam off of DJI's site. I'm still waiting for that to ship, but I'm really looking forward to getting that on my goggles. The padding that comes standard definitely adds some nice protection, but this upgraded foam that I have here on my older FPV goggles version 2 is so comfy and squishy that I've just become used to it. I kind of wish that this was the foam that they used right out of the gate on all of their goggles. Now, something not as specific to the Goggles 2 is the headband, because you could easily use any other headband that you want. This isn't some sort of proprietary mount, it's just 2 loops on either side of the headset. I like it better than the strap that came with the FPV Goggles version 2 though, because it doesn't wrap over the top of my head, which always messed up my hair. This is just a single strap that's thicker and wraps around the back of your head. The final design change on this new set of goggles here is the diopters on the bottom side of the headset that allow you to focus the lenses to your eyes. Older FPV goggles from DJI just had the ability to slide the lenses from left to right to accommodate different eye widths, which worked well, but now with the Goggles 2, you can further adjust the lenses to your eyes by spinning the dials to set the focus to your eyes. These diopters also lock in place so that they don't accidentally adjust when you throw them inside of your bag. Now, moving on from the design and jumping inside of the goggles, we've got a couple of different upgrades to mention, primarily speaking regarding the screens. So the resolution has been bumped from 810p on the older version 2 FPV goggles to full 1080p, giving you a really clear view of the live view and screen. The panels themselves have also been upgraded to micro OLED as opposed to the LED screens in previous goggles. This gives you deeper blacks, improves contrast, and overall looks more crisp. The one downside is that the refresh rate has been decreased to 100 Hz as opposed to the 120 Hz refresh rate of the older FPV goggles version 2. This is the trade-off that I guess we have to make, considering we now have a higher resolution screen and it's a micro OLED screen. Now, in regards to those micro OLED panels, I didn't realize how much a difference that they'd make until I put on the older set of goggles with the LED panels. Now, first of all, I'm gonna say that there is nothing wrong with these goggles. If you wanna save a little bit of money and pick up the older FPV goggles version 2 for your Avata, you're still gonna have a great experience. That does have a higher refresh rate, so maybe that's something you really care about and you might actually prefer going with these goggles, but those OLED panels immerse you so much more in the content that you're viewing. Like when you put these on and it cuts out all of the light and you turn them on and it just says DJI right in the middle, that's all you see, just the letters in the center, and everything else is pitch black. So it immerses you so much more in your flights, and for that reason, that's why I really do enjoy flying with these goggles. Now, moving on from the design and from the screens, because those are the 2 biggest upgrades, I now want to touch on a couple of small features that they've added to the goggles that just kind of add to the overall user experience. For one, the UI has been improved, so as I sort of mentioned when discussing the new touchpad control, you now have easy access to menus, there are quick settings that are accessible when you swipe down, and now when you record the screen of your goggles, you actually have the overlay of your telemetry data, which is really awesome to reference for videos. It's no longer just like a lower resolution of your camera output. You can also see the menus and whatnot as well, so it's more of like an actual screen recording now. Jumping back to hardware, there's now a small sensor built into the headset that sits just in between the lenses. This allows the goggles to know if they're on your face or just sitting on the ground, so they can save power by shutting off the screens when not in use. I'm guilty of always leaving my battery turned on in between flights when I set my goggles down, so it's a really nice way to save some battery. Now, the final changes I want to get into are so minor, but I feel like I should mention them because they are upgrades that have been included here with the Goggles 2. So as you guys know, we have an external battery to power these goggles, and we now have a new wire design that's coiled and a new battery design with a clip to make sure it doesn't come unplugged mid-flight. You'll still be able to use all those old batteries and wires that you have laying around, but this updated design feels nice and fresh and adds a little functionality with that small clip. So these DJI Goggles 2 really are awesome. They're small, they're lightweight, they are very comfortable to just throw onto your head. And again, I really do enjoy kind of like this back strap more than the strap that goes directly over the top of your head, but you can always change out the strap if you need to. Now, as of recording this video and uploading it here, August 28th, 2022, the Goggles 2 are only compatible with the Avata, but I could see them opening it up to other drones because within the UI, you've got the ability to easily switch between devices. So we'll see what DJI ends up doing. They always have some tricks up their sleeve, like a couple of months after product releases. So we'll see what happens, but as of now, these are currently only available for the Avata, and they make the experience just that much better. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed this little trip down memory lane of all of the different goggles that DJI has made. It's cool to see that these are an actual upgrade from those original goggles released way back when. We finally got a second version. So let me know what you guys think down in the comment section below. And as always, I'll talk to you later. Peace.